So moving to our topic tonight, women in Saudi Arabia. Most scientific studies on the country focus on its oil resources or its culture and religion, and not infrequently, its women. And since this account tonight is concerned with women in Saudi, it would be helpful to provide some historical milestones on the progress of women in the kingdom. Okay? So, in 1955, the first private school by Iffat, the princess consort of late King Faisal, established Dar al-Hanan, which is actually the first ever girls' private school in Saudi Arabia. In the 1960s, Saudi witnessed the setup of the Governorate of Girls' Education, which is essentially the public system of education for girls. It hosted 15 schools, public schools, and 5,000 plus students. 1971, the kingdom witnessed an enormous economic boom. The first public school with 21 students, public high school with 21 students, was also launched. In the 1980s, the kingdom witnessed the return of radicalism against women and reform. However, education continued to expand, induced by the government. The rate of participation for women in the job market was still limited to education and healthcare. In the year 2000, KSA signed the CEDAW, which is a convention on the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. In 2002, education supervision for boys and girls merged after 42 years of separation and full governance by the religious authority. Now, mind you, this does not indicate in any way that there is a co-education between boys and girls, simply administratively merged. Today, however, more than 25% of the entire Saudi Arabian budget is allocated to educating girls and boys, so basically. So regarding their progress in public life over the past decade, in 2003, the National Dialogue, which is representing the government, first admitted and acknowledged and addressed women's issues, social and economic. In 2004, there was a first attempt for women to vote in municipal elections. And that's just voting. That's not running for candidacy or anything. It failed. 2008, social campaigning for women in the retail sector, and we'll come to that in a few moments. 2011, the labor law rules women's employment in the industry. 2013, the long-awaited appointment of 32 women in consultative council, which is equivalent to the parliament or any legislative government body, constituting 21% of its entire body of members. So these images are historical of images of Saudi women in the 60s, in the 1960s, through the 1980s. They were photographed in Jeddah's first private school, which was established in the 1950s by Princess Iffat. So as you can see, I mean, this school, I graduated in that school. I won't say when, but I do have fond memories of that place. Moving to some observations on female unemployment. Now, despite the leap in education facilities and the government catalysts and the introduction of all educational facilities, the following numbers may pose a few questions. The economic participation rate of women still low at 12%, and the unemployment rate of eligible workforce is 29%, which is very high. According to an article by a famous economist and an expert in Saudi economic affairs, the main reason, and I quote him, the main reason for the numerical rise in unemployment rates can be found in the difficulties that women face in finding jobs and securing work. And although chances of finding work have slightly improved since 2009, that improvement has been quite limited, and their employment rates are still extremely low, where it rose from 8.5% to merely 10%. He continues, the rate of employment of only 10% indicates that there are hundreds of thousands more women in working age who are not employed, especially that they constitute 57% of all university graduates, and that's a fact. Now, perhaps the comparison to other nations may not be appropriate here, since Saudi Arabia is not considered a developed country. Excuse me. However, its massive resources are under pressure to create jobs for a much larger portion of the workforce. So, in conclusion, one of the challenges for Saudi Arabian policymakers in the coming years is how to find appropriate jobs for women to help them get their fair share in the development of the country and make better use of their high levels of education. I can't agree more. So, how are policymakers handling the challenge? Slide 19, I believe. Okay. According to the Ministry of Labor, According to the Ministry of Labor, the short-term or the 2-year objective for the Saudi employment strategy is to control unemployment. And that's just stated on their website. Underneath that objective, if you just look a little bit carefully, falls the expansion of employment for Saudi women who want work. According to the website, again, the mechanism of implementation ranges from direct recruitment in government offices to training and facilitating work from home. Among these 5 mechanisms, I find that the 5th is key. What it says here, determination and classification of jobs that could be occupied by Saudi women. In other words, what this is saying, it is referring to the work fields that are suitable and accepted by the society at the current moment in time. Meanwhile, introducing gradual changes in work regulation and slowly eliminating certain obstacles. For instance, the country recently took steps to empower female lawyers who could not argue cases in court prior to these reforms. Unfortunately, despite government spending and work policy changes and easing, there remains to be impediments. So what are they? Categorically speaking, they can be limited or inclusive of 4 key impediments. First and foremost, social and cultural, to the surprise of many. They include issues such as, do women actually want to work? The gender mixing issue, career-family balance, which is a global dilemma for all working women. Second, regulatory impediments, the fields of work. Women's jobs remain heavily concentrated in the fields of education and healthcare because these were traditionally the only jobs open to them. And as a result, these sectors are oversaturated and recent graduates struggle to find the jobs for which they're qualified. Logistics and work guidelines. For instance, female owners of businesses that serve both men and women, such as restaurants, hospitality business, and so on, are required to have male managers. And some restrictions that have been eased in theory are still not in effect in practice. Third, women empowerment. Training and preparation. For example, there is an acute shortage of qualified female nationals in the areas that are critical to the economy, such as engineering and technology. Financial support. Female entrepreneurs rely heavily on family and friends rather than traditional forms of financing. A recent survey by Booz & Co. found that 82% of all registered businesswomen relied on personal savings. 13% sought contributions or loans from relatives and family and friends. Childcare. Although the law states that female recruiting organizations provide childcare facilities, it remains unenforced. Finally, transportation. And please, I'm not getting into this tonight. Public transport system remains to be absent, a proper one. And women are banned from driving in the kingdom. So we'll skip over that and go to the most pressing impediment among all these four categories. Now, despite the multitude of hindrance factors, experts do agree with very little or no doubt that culture and society stands as the prime factor behind the women's progress or disadvantage, both economically and socially. Glowwork is a Saudi firm that specializes in the recruitment of women in a variety of fields. It focuses on the mismatch in job supply and demand. Earlier this year, it published a report on the recruitment of women in the retail industry, a large economic sector that absorbs huge numbers of job seekers without much or high education requirement. Slide 26. So, what Glowwork did is that it conducted a survey of 100 women, a sample that is not representative of the entire society, but a good part of it, mainly in the city of Jeddah. It has been conducted, and the figures on the screen shows the results. 35% of all respondents believe that awareness campaigns will encourage the Saudi public to accept women working in the retail sector. 33% encourage publicizing the laws and regulations that are clear for every citizen to understand. So, basically, the majority of respondents believe that a collaboration of regulation and cultural awareness will affect the desired change. In my assessment, this approach can be applied to more economic sectors, not just the retail industry. Which takes us to the story of the evening. Slide 28. Okay. This is a story of a small incident that grew to become a catalyst for women employment in the kingdom's massive retail industry. And it is massive indeed. In 2008, I personally made a complaint against a women's apparel store salesman for his unprofessional attitude. That incident induced the famously called Women's Apparel Campaign, which gained international recognition, staring underlying issues about women in the kingdom, many of them. The campaign primarily argued that women, rather than men, should be allowed to work in intimate apparel shops across the kingdom, which is pretty obvious. In July 2011, the Ministry of Labor introduced a series of laws banning the recruitment of men in lingerie, apparel, and makeup stores after a strong directive from King Abdullah. Such move created at least 40,000 jobs for women. The magnitude of such move made world headlines. And if you wonder why, simply because it demystifies many underlying issues on a hot topic, women in Saudi Arabia. Some media referred to the story as the Lingerie Campaign, others commended the law, and some viewed it as the beginning of an irreversible empowerment of Saudi women. And this is just one example of how the collaboration of both society and policy can generate wide-scale results in a relatively short time. If we go back just a few slides back, we will see that just to effect or introduce some kind of a change or reform, it took a decade minimum, or maybe 20 years, without much change. Today, different story. So, photograph, slide 31. Do we have the photograph of King Abdullah? Okay. Okay, that was in the beginning. Okay, so this is a photograph of King Abdullah with a number of accomplished Saudi women in a variety of fields. At the time of the release, it correctly indicated a new era for Saudi women. In his widely quoted statement, and I quote him, "The woman is my daughter, sister, and wife." The king declares his strongest support for women. So to conclude, the government, represented by King Abdullah and his team, he's a visionary leader. He is strongly in favor of empowering and enabling women. There's no question about that. Second, women's status is in transitional mode. It has been this way since the 1960s. Third, culture and society are key determinants of how far the women advancement can stretch at any point in time. Fourth, what we really need is a mass effect to generate real change. Change needs not come only from the top or forcefully. Social change is best achieved organically. And in a fast-changing world around us, and with all the catalysts such as social media and telecom, it will not be long before the Saudi society reaches a reasonable level of equilibrium. Thank you.
Okay, we have plenty of time for questions, so does anyone have a question for Reem?
Ask away.
Yeah.
Also reinforces this really harmful narrative that men are good for some jobs and women are good for some jobs. So we're going to separate the two entirely by banning one from working in the other person's interest, basically.
That's a logical question. There had to be a point of start. When the campaign began, it started by the most obvious. So banning or not banning was not the question. Women had to make an entry into the job market, and we had to start with the obvious and the inarguable, which was lingerie stores, makeup stores, women's apparel stores. Just a logical place for them to be in, and not to be occupied by men. I mean, if you look at the stores, even in the West or anywhere else in the world, they're normally and rightfully staffed and run by women. So I believe this should be no different in the kingdom.
Okay, any more questions? Right at the back there. In the middle at the back.
Right. Firstly, thank you for the very informative talk. Without getting too political, the differences between the ambitions of maybe the Saudi ruling class and other elements in Saudi society, when do you actually see this organic growth taking off? Do you see that within the next 10 years, 20 years, or even sooner than that?
Oh, definitely sooner than that. I mean, we're already witnessing a lot of change in the social norms, the behavior, the adaptation of different ideas, the entrepreneurship, the skills acquired by the younger generation. It's amazing. Now, that change may not be clearly visible by the rest of the world, but in reality and amongst us, we know it, we sense it, and we hear it. It's all over the social media. It's just amazing. So I think in 5 years down the line, things will be dramatically different, and to the better.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's a question down here in the middle. We'll just have to get a microphone.
Hi, thank you so much for coming to talk to us. I was just wondering how hard it is for a woman in Saudi Arabia to speak out, and if you yourself faced much backlash sort of to bring about change.
Frankly speaking, throughout my career, which began in the year 1999, I mean, I hardly faced any impediments. I've been in the banking industry. I'm an investment analyst by profession, and I've been there since the year 2000. I worked at, back then, Merrill Lynch in California, in Boston. I've been out and about, and I have to give a lot of credit to my family. A lot of, the constraints that women face is culturally based and is family based. So it's not the country and the state, as per se. It is more of a cultural thing. That's why in the presentation I focused on that, because this is a huge misrepresentation of the country. People often misconstrue the government, and they tend to mix roles, and they don't know much better. And I came in tonight to make a point. It is the culture and the society that dictates a lot of the things that go on there. The social norms, the economic behavior, the spending, the expansion, the contraction. A lot of things are determined by culture and society. So women participation is no different.
Okay. Do you have any more questions? Right at the back there, on the right-hand side. See that?
Thank you so much for the speech.
Sure.
We really enjoyed it. Just to follow up to the kind of, I understand that it's the culture and society because I come from a very similar culture. I'm a neighbor of yours. And in my view, the culture and society, the narrative that the culture kind of, that controls the culture is created by elements, and a lot of people misconstrue that as the royal families. But my royal family, my monarch, the Emir of Kuwait, is a very open-minded man, just like King Abdullah is a very open-minded man. But I know that our social ills are not monarchical at its core. There are other elements,
Right.
and those other elements create a very dangerous narrative that's currently decimating Egypt, and they want to, enforce that narrative here, especially in Saudi Arabia. So I believe that the influence of the political cannot be overemphasized.
So
Thank you.
what you're trying to say is that change has to come top way down, or forced upon the people or the nation?
I think that culturally, those who create the narrative will always dictate the tempo of the culture, whether it's in this country or in our countries. And the only way to sort of eradicate that is to reinforce loyalty to our monarchs.
Well, I hope that the kingdom is currently successful in trying to achieve that. So far, I mean, normally I don't get into political discourse or anything of the sort. I tend to focus on the economy, which is, in my opinion, a little bit more constructive. I believe that women participation in the economy will yield and will lead to a lot of change. Maybe not in a year time or a couple of years' time, but down the line, I mean, I lived and witnessed the difference from the 80s throughout today, and I've seen a lot of change. I've witnessed economic cycles, ups and downs, and I've seen population mushrooming. I almost don't recognize my city anymore because of the people in it, and that puts a lot of pressure on the infrastructure, on the level of tolerance of people, the density of population per square meter and square mile. these are key determinants of where the country is going and how the people will behave down the line. So I really think that culture and society has the biggest impact, and that change has to be organic. That's my opinion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any more questions at all?
Yeah,
Okay.
I promised to give him the first question.
Yeah.
He says to me with the slides.
There's a microphone coming.
Right, my question's about pretty much equality, and in an economic sense.
Much equality?
Equality in an economic sense and in a social sense. Like, because after everything's said and done, right, most people would agree that Saudi Arabia is one of the most conservative, socially conservative societies in the world, and women are being, well, the rest of the world is judging it from, I think, a Western paradigm where equality is like across the board, everyone's equal.
Right.
But at the end of the day, right, when all the campaigning, all the social work and everything's been done, what is the aim? Is it to make women and men on an even platform? Or is it a sort of subjective equality based on maybe some kind of, you know, cultural paradigm? Because, I mean, who's to say that a Western paradigm is the right paradigm anyway? So my question is, like, what's going on?
I came across a numerical and a particular figure that was stated in the central bank report. It did say that the 8th development plan, which is sort of like a yearly, a 5-year kind of plan by the government, you know, to strategize the economic growth, it did dictate that we want to elevate the participation of women in the economy by 30% or something of the sort. So there are quantifiable measures here, and we do have some numbers out there. And I think that societies are like markets in a sense. They tend to regulate themselves over time, and as soon as they reach some sort of equilibrium by definition is very temporary, so they move on, and that is evolution. I don't know where exactly the society is heading, but I know that it's just converging with the rest of the world.
Do we have any other questions? Right. I have one down front from Twitter, I guess.
Hi, we have a question out via the Twitter feed from Christoph Kuhn, who would like to know how does the Sharia law affect the opportunities for change for Arab women?
Oh, Sharia law, opportunities. That's a big question. Sharia law does not detail how women could work or where they should work. There are codes of ethics to be observed across the board, but that really govern probably the dress code, the attitude, the behavior. But that's that. It does not tell us where to go to work or what field should we be in or anything like that. So Sharia law is not really the key here, if that answers your question.
Any more questions at all? Okay, right at the very back there, and then we'll have one over there. I think that'll be enough.
Do you think that the fact that the new generations of Arab men are being educated in Europe and so see frequently how Western women are active in society will help them accept that also Saudi women will take a more important role in your society?
Interesting question. Saudi men have been sent out for education in Europe and in America and in Australia over the past 50 years? 50 years, 40, 50 years, easy. So this is not new. And now with the expansion in the education planning for the young generation, I mean, a lot of them are now, I mean, in the United States alone, there's at least 100,000 Saudi students, both male and female, an unprecedented number Never ever expected in the 90s. I mean, when I went to college myself, I did not have a scholarship myself. Today, I mean, people go there in families, in batches. So it's amazing how things are changing fast in that sense. Now, how will that impact them? Well, we do hope that it does so positively. I mean, their exposure to foreign culture, to foreign language, to foreign practices, I can't really say it's bad or good, but change is always good, in my opinion. Change usually brings about good things.
Okay, we had one question up there. It's still, yeah.
I was going to say, how important was social media in helping you raise awareness in your campaign, and how important do you think it'll be in the future?
Oh, a lot. Social media has proven to be the fastest way to get the information across, to send the message to a larger number of people, obviously. The conventional media, I wouldn't say it was unhelpful, but the way the conventional media presents the information and delivers it to the public is not as effective as it used to be in the past. So people prefer their own versions and their own judgments, and I think that is more easily achieved through social media. It's more interactive.
Yeah, quickly. You said about raising awareness. Would you use social media as the optimal platform, or would you choose something else?
Come again, please?
You said you wanted to raise awareness. Would you think social media is the optimal platform for that, or would you choose a different channel?
Well, for the moment in time, I mean, it depends on the kind of message that you're trying to get across. So if it's really some sort of survey or trying to test, you know, the acceptance or understanding of people on a certain issue, that's social media for sure. I mean, it's so fast and quick. If you are to lecture, for instance, a university setting is an ideal one with a relatively large audience, such as this one, is an excellent way of doing it. The conventional media is more formal and it's more state-controlled, so we want to get a formal message across. It is ultimately endorsed. It should be ultimately endorsed by the conventional media, i.e. the press and newspapers and television.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, do we have any more questions for Reem this evening? Yep, we've got one more there.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank you for an interesting speech. And you spoke a lot about all this extraordinary progress in Saudi Arabia, and yet you said that Saudi Arabian women are still banned from driving. And I'd like to specifically ask you, like, are any measures being taken in this direction, or how do you see women? Do you see women driving in Saudi Arabia in the near future? Thank you.
I'm not quite sure about the answer here, but what I do know is that the king has once alluded to the fact that this is a question of time. It is a matter of time. And I think that is also, although it is obviously controlled by the state, I think it also has to do with the culture. I mean, if you just put up a question on Twitter and try to test how, you know, the appetite of people allowing their wives, daughters, or sisters to drive out there in the streets, you will get a lot of no's. But again, I think it's a question of time, because things are progressing and things are changing gradually. They're slow, I know. There's no denying, but they're changing. Now, we can take a positive approach, or we can take a negative approach and be unhappy about it. I'd rather do the positive one.